Have you ever had a moment at work when something felt so wrong, so unfair, that your heart knew the truth before your mind could even catch up? Have you ever felt the sting of watching someone steal your effort, your ideas, your late nights, and wear them like a crown in front of the very people who doubted you? And if that happened to you, what would you do? Would you confront them on the spot, or keep calm and gather the kind of proof that cannot be denied? Tell me in the comments what you would have done, because the moment my story began, I had no idea the storm I was walking into. Now, take a breath with me. Sit with me. And let me tell you exactly what happened on the morning everything changed. My quiet sunrise, a stranger's warning, and the betrayal that turned my world inside out. My name is Dana Whitefeather. I am 37 years old, born in the red-dusted plains outside Gallup, New Mexico, and I work as a strategy lead at Sierra Point Technologies here in Denver. I have always been the kind of woman who arrives early, prepares twice, and fights quietly for the respect I earn. That morning, just before sunrise, I walked into the building expecting a peaceful hour to polish my presentation, a project that had consumed my thoughts for weeks. Instead, the universe placed a stranger in my path, and nothing about that day went the way I expected. As I approached the conference room, the new janitor, Mr. Amos Graywind, paused his sweeping and looked at me with an expression that felt older than time. His voice was calm, almost whispering, as he said, "Ma'am, you might not want to go in there yet." The way he spoke made the hair on my arms rise. It was not fear, but a strange pull of instinct, the kind that says something is not right. I slowed my steps, unsure why a simple warning felt like a storm cloud settling over my shoulders. Curiosity tugged at me harder than caution, so I leaned in toward the frosted glass panel on the door. At first, all I saw were silhouettes, someone pointing toward the screen, someone else nodding, then the shapes sharpened, and my stomach tightened. There he was, Landon Pierce, the vice president's son, standing at the front of the room with my project deck on display behind him. He gestured with the kind of confidence a man wears only when he believes the world belongs to him. In that quiet moment, watching him present something I built with my own hands, a wave of shock, resentment, and disbelief washed through me like a slow-burning fire. It was the moment I realized my morning would no longer belong to peace, but to battle. My breath caught in my throat as I pressed my palm lightly against the cool glass, trying to ground myself before my thoughts spun out of control. At first, I wanted to believe it was some misunderstanding, maybe a shared slide or an accidental upload, something harmless. But deep down, in the place where instinct never lies, I already knew the truth. Landon was not just speaking from my deck. He was performing it, owning it, selling it as if every word had come straight from his mind. That realization burned hotter than I was ready for. I forced my eyes to focus on the screen behind him, searching for anything that would make sense of what I was seeing. Then I saw it. A single misplaced letter that struck me harder than any punch could have. There, on the third slide, was the typo I had made in my late-night working draft, the version I saved only on my local desktop, the one labeled "Do Not Use." Internal notes. I had spelled marketplace incorrectly as markplace, a tiny human slip I planned to fix in the morning. No one else had access to that file. I had never uploaded it to our shared drive. I had never emailed it. I had never even spoken about that version aloud. The only way he could have it was by physically accessing my workstation. A chill rolled through me as the realization locked into place. This was not an accident. This was a theft carried out with intention and nerve. I felt resentment rising through me, slow and steady, like the rumble of distant thunder. I stepped back from the glass, trying to keep my breathing even. My heart pounded not just with anger, but with something sharper, a strange mixture of betrayal and clarity. Someone had crossed a line I never imagined they would dare approach, and I knew I could not ignore it. Not today. Not ever. I stepped away from the conference room door, feeling the weight of what I had just witnessed settle deep into my chest. For a moment, I considered barging in, exposing Landon right there in front of everyone, demanding an explanation he would never be able to give. But anger without strategy is just noise, and I refused to let my voice become something easy for them to dismiss. I closed my eyes for a second, letting the memory of home steady me, remembering my grandmother's words, "When the wind stirs the dust, you do not shout at it. You watch where it blows." So I turned away from the door, tightening my grip on my bag, and walked quickly toward stairwell C. The stairwell was cold and quiet, tucked away from the early morning chatter of the office. It had always been my refuge on the harder days, a place where I could gather my thoughts without eyes watching. As soon as the door clicked shut behind me, I pulled out my phone with hands steadier than my heartbeat. I knew I needed to protect myself, and that meant creating a trail that no one could erase. I opened my email and typed a short, careful message to the legal team, phrased simply as a security concern regarding potential unauthorized access. The moment I pressed send, I felt a small sense of control return to me. Then I called Julian Ramos in IT. Julian and I had worked together for years, and I trusted him more than most people in that building. When he answered, his voice was groggy, still waking up. I kept my tone steady as I explained what I needed. "Julian, can you check the login activity on my profile? This morning? Early. It is important." He paused, hearing the tension I tried to hide. "Give me a few minutes. Dana," he said. "Stay where you are." I ended the call and leaned back against the cool metal railing, the rush of resentment, disbelief, and determination swirling through me. Something had been taken from me, but I was not planning to walk away empty-handed. I stayed in that stairwell, listening to the soft hum of the building waking up around me, my thoughts moving faster than my heartbeat. Every few seconds I checked my phone, waiting for Julian to call back, wondering what kind of evidence he would find. I did not have to wait long. My phone buzzed, and when I saw his name, a cold anticipation settled over me the moment I answered. Julian spoke in a low, almost cautious voice. "Dana, I checked the logs. Someone used your credentials at 6:18 this morning. From the conference room terminal." I closed my eyes, letting the confirmation sink in fully. It was different hearing it out loud, different knowing someone else saw the trail I already suspected. "And Dana," he added, "they accessed your local desktop through the network. It shows the file path leading to your draft folder." That detail hit me like a second blow. He had not just stolen my presentation. He had gone into the space where my raw ideas lived, the place I kept unpolished thoughts and late-night revisions. It felt personal in a way theft alone could not explain. Julian sent me screenshots of the activity logs, each one marked with times, file names, and digital fingerprints that told the truth more clearly than any confession ever could. I thanked him softly, promising I would handle the rest. When the call ended, I stood there for a moment, staring at the glowing screen. The proof was solid, undeniable. My resentment sharpened into something clearer, more deliberate. This was not just a violation of my work. It was a violation of my trust, my boundaries, my dignity. With that realization, a steady calm settled over me. I gathered the screenshots, saved them in multiple places, and straightened my posture. The storm had already begun, but now I was ready to face it on my terms. I left the stairwell with my phone held tightly in my hand, the evidence still glowing on the screen like a warning flare. As I walked down the hallway toward my office, my mind began piecing together moments I had brushed off before. Times when one of my ideas miraculously showed up in Landon's pitch decks. Times when his presentations carried the same structure as mine, the same tone, even the same analogies I used from my childhood stories. I had always tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, telling myself that in a company as interconnected as Sierra Point Technologies, coincidences were bound to happen. But now that veil had been torn away. When I reached my office, I sat down at my desk and opened old folders, comparing them to past company presentations led by Landon. I looked through formatting, paragraph breaks, color schemes, even the small stylistic quirks that only I used. The similarities were overwhelming. There were sentences copied almost word for word from emails I had written to myself as reminders. There were diagrams that matched my hand-drawn versions, even down to the tiny slanted arrow I always sketched. These were not accidents. These were patterns. Patterns that stretched months back, maybe even longer. A slow ache formed in my chest as I scrolled through each stolen idea. It was not just the theft itself that hurt. It was the realization that while I'd been working late nights, pouring my energy into making each project better than the last, he had been quietly collecting the shine from my labor and presenting it as his own. My resentment shifted into something steadier, more focused. I was no longer shocked. I was no longer confused. I was simply done allowing someone else to step into the light I earned. I gathered every file, every comparison, and began preparing the truth for those who needed to see it. With every file I organized and every comparison chart I created, my confidence grew steadier, like I was finally reclaiming something that had been slipping from my hands without me noticing. I compiled timestamps, file hashes, screenshots, and side-by-side examples until my desktop looked like a battlefield map. When I felt everything was clear enough that no one could twist the truth, I gathered my documents and made my way toward the legal department. My pulse was strong, not frantic, but purposeful, the way it felt before an important decision back home when the elders gathered to speak their truth. Maria Snow, our lead counsel, was already at her desk when I arrived. She looked up, surprised to see me so early, but the moment she saw my expression, her posture shifted. "Dana, what happened?" she asked. I laid the folder of evidence on her desk and explained everything, start to finish, speaking calmly because I did not need emotion to prove my case. The facts were enough. Maria opened the folder and scanned the first few pages. Her brows pulled tight, and she muttered under her breath, "This is more serious than I expected." She continued reading, her face growing sharper with each piece of evidence. When she finally looked up, there was a steadiness in her eyes that matched my own. "We will handle this quietly," she said. "No warnings, no whispers, no chance for anyone to cover their tracks. I will initiate a silent audit immediately." The certainty in her tone felt like the first warm beam of sunlight breaking through a storm. She thanked me for documenting everything so clearly, then asked me to stay silent and act as if nothing unusual had happened. As I walked out of her office, I felt the shift inside me. I had gone from wounded to ready, from blindsided to steady. Whatever came next, I knew the truth was finally moving in my favor. When I left the legal department, the hallway felt strangely brighter, as if the building itself knew a shift was coming. I walked slowly back toward the central office wing, keeping my expression calm, just as Maria instructed. The aroma of catered breakfast drifted through the air as I approached the conference room again, and that smell alone made my stomach twist. It was a celebration scent, warm and sweet, but it clashed painfully with everything I had uncovered that morning. From a distance, I could see the glass walls of the conference room glowing with morning light. Inside, the entire board sat around the table, smiling, laughing, sipping coffee, completely unaware that the foundation of their celebration was built on stolen work. Landon stood at the front of the room, soaking in their praise with the ease of a man who had never been challenged. Even his father, the vice president, looked proud enough to burst, clapping a hand on his son's shoulder as if raising a future leader. I stood in the hallway, hands clasped behind my back, watching through the glass like an outsider in my own story. I felt a wave of disappointment. Not the sharp kind that hits all at once, but the slow, heavy kind that settles into your bones. Months of stolen effort, stolen ideas, stolen opportunities, all being celebrated as if they were born from brilliance instead of deceit. The resentment inside me tightened into something quieter, something more rooted than anger, almost like sorrow for the version of myself that once believed hard work alone would protect me. But beneath that sorrow was a calm resolve. I knew Maria was moving quietly behind the scenes. I knew the silent audit had begun, and I also knew that every smile inside that room was temporary. Every congratulatory pat on Landon's back was living on borrowed time. I took a slow breath, straightened my shoulders, and stepped away from the glass. The celebration was theirs for now, but the truth was already making its way toward them, steady as a rising tide. I waited near the corner of the hallway, out of sight but close enough to hear the muffled echoes of their celebration winding down. My heart beat with a calm, steady rhythm, not from fear, but from the quiet certainty that justice was finally moving into place. A few minutes passed before I saw Maria Snow walking toward the conference room with Ruth Holloway, our HR director. Beside her, their steps were purposeful, their expressions unreadable, and the moment I saw them, I knew the tide had shifted. They did not knock. They simply opened the conference room door and stepped inside with the steady authority of people who carried truth as their shield. The room fell silent almost instantly. Even from the hallway, I could sense the change, like the air had thinned. Maria placed a folder on the table with the same calm energy she had shown in her office earlier. "Before you continue," she said, her voice steady and clear, "we need to address a serious matter involving unauthorized access to company credentials." The board members exchanged confused glances, and the vice president straightened in his chair, unease rippling across his face. Landon's smile faltered, his eyes darting quickly from his father to the folder on the table. Maria continued, "At 6:18 this morning, someone logged into the conference room terminal using Ms. Whitefeather's credentials." Ruth stepped forward and added, "The access includes files marked as restricted and personal drafts not shared with any department." A heavy silence settled over the room, the kind that reveals guilt long before anyone speaks. I stayed near the doorway, unseen but present, watching the energy drain from Landon's posture. The celebration had ended, not with applause fading into laughter, but with the sharp stillness of truth being placed in front of everyone. And for the first time that morning, I felt the first hint of balance returning, like the scales had finally begun to shift back where they belonged. Maria's words hung in the air like a heavy curtain, and I knew this was the moment I needed to step forward. I walked toward the conference room door with calm, measured steps. When I entered, every face in the room turned toward me, their expressions shifting from confusion to realization. Landon looked as if the ground had tilted beneath him. His father sat stiffly, jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitch from where I stood. I kept my posture steady, refusing to let the weight of the moment shake me. Maria nodded for me to speak, and I placed my phone gently on the table. "At 6:18 this morning," I said. I was 10 miles away. I opened the receipts and location logs I had prepared, displaying the timestamp from the cafe where I had stopped before work. "Here is my purchase receipt, GPS data from my phone, and the transaction log." I was nowhere near this building when my credentials were used. A murmur spread across the room as the board members leaned in to look at the evidence. I continued, my voice steady but edged with the hurt I had carried for months. "The file access this morning came from my personal draft folder. A location no one else has permission to open, the slide deck presented here." I gestured toward the screen. "Contains errors and formatting choices that exist only in my unpublished version." Landon finally tried to speak, his voice cracking around the edges. "I thought the file was shared. Maybe it's synced on its own, maybe." His excuses tumbled out, weak and scattered. But Maria raised a hand, silencing him with a single gesture. "The system logs show manual access. Mr. Pierce. Not automation. Not a sync. A deliberate login." The room fell into a heavier silence, one that left no space for denial. For the first time since this began, I felt the truth settle solidly on my side, grounding me like the roots of an old tree. I did not need anger. I did not need to shout. The evidence spoke louder than anything I could ever say. The silence that followed Maria's words felt heavier than any judgment I could have delivered myself. Landon's shoulders slumped, his face drained of color, and the confidence he had displayed earlier evaporated into thin air. His father looked between him and the evidence laid out on the table, as if trying to reconcile the son he believed he had with the truth unfolding in front of him. No one moved. No one spoke. The weight of betrayal was thick enough to touch. Ruth Holloway, the HR director, finally broke the silence by clearing her throat. Her tone was firm but not unkind as she said, "Mr. Pierce, we need you to step outside with me." Landon opened his mouth, then closed it again, defeated. He stood slowly, as if each motion cost him a piece of pride he could not afford to lose, and followed Ruth toward the door. The room remained painfully quiet until it shut behind them. It was only then that the vice president rose to speak, his voice low and strained. "Dana, I had no idea." His words trembled with a mixture of shock and humiliation, but I simply nodded. There was nothing left for me to explain. The truth had already spoken for me. Maria stepped forward and addressed the board with calm authority. "Effective immediately, Ms. Whitefeather will be reinstated as the lead on this project. A full investigation regarding credential misuse and intellectual property theft will follow." One of the board members, an older woman with silver hair, turned to me and said gently, "We owe you an apology, and more than that, we owe you recognition." Her sincerity softened something tight inside my chest. Later that afternoon, I received an official offer letter promoting me to Director of Innovation Strategy. I sat in my office alone when it arrived, letting the reality settle in slowly. It was not triumph I felt, nor vengeance, but something steadier. A deep, quiet sense of balance returning. My work was mine again. My voice was heard. My dignity was intact. And as I looked out the window at the mountains stretching across the horizon, I felt a peace I had not known in months, knowing the storm had passed and I had walked through it with truth on my side. If there is one thing I learned from this battle, it is that truth does not always shout, but it always arrives. Sometimes the quietest strength we have is patience. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is letting people reveal themselves in the light they thought would protect them. And sometimes, the universe waits for the perfect moment to hand you back everything that was yours. So, after hearing my story, what do you think? Have you ever had someone take credit for your work, your ideas, or your effort? How did you handle it? Or how do you wish you had handled it? Share your thoughts below. I read every comment, and your stories matter just as much as mine.